Yeah, I guess the best way to describe it would just be to connect what I saw with exactly what I felt. Um, so yeah, like I was saying, when it was there, full strength, everything's lit up. I'm looking at it. I feel calm. My brain's repeating, they're here, they're here. I don't know what that means. Um, it felt great. It felt like, an old friend was back from, a long trip or visiting after they had moved away. It was like, this is really cool. And then
Yes, and many children see them too. About 75% of the world's children today are being born with etheric vision. And when your children talk with people and have daydream playmates, the chances are they are actually speaking to some of these people. Because these angels or angelic forces, or nature spirits as they're often called, will often make themselves seen.
Whatever it is, it looks every bit like a fairy and very little like anything else.
But seriously, it kind of looks like a fairy. Just kind of doesn't look like your standard mall.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
But I wasn't going to make this video until I looked a little bit closer and I realized after it lands behind my bench, it disappears. And it just vanishes. And in fact, I went outside to look, to try to find it, to see if it was trash, to see if it was a bug, to see if it was a leaf, like trying to figure out what it could be, and it was gone. It just vanished.
What's that? Yeah. What's what? Yeah, look. Right up there. Insect or something.
Is that an insect? Let's have a look. What is it?
I don't know. Oh my god!
Ugh.
What happens to people who cut down fairy films?
Did you see it? Huh? Did you see it?
Yeah, me and him saw it.
What'd you see?
It was like a big creature.
A big creature?
Yeah, like around 10 feet tall.
I'm not going to BS you guys. One of my partners said they saw something fall out of the sky too, so that's why I'm kind of curious. Did you see anything land in your backyard?
The paranormal is real. Is it? The paranormal is real.
Welcome back, everybody, tonight to Fascinating Fae. Tonight, I'm very excited to jump back into interviewing people after a brief break. We've got a really wonderful story and encounter to share tonight from a fellow Canadian. Tonight, we're going to be talking to Becca from Ontario. Becca, how are you this fine evening?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Becca and I have had a chance to talk before starting this interview, and we've had such a fun and totally fascinating conversation. So that's why I know tonight's episode is going to be a lot of fun for the listeners and probably, for me especially, really interesting to hear. As it would appear that what Becca has seen is remarkably similar to what I have also seen. And so, Becca, just at the top of the show, something that I have neglected to do, but I have been reminded to do, so forgive me as I do a little tiny bit of housekeeping here before your interview. The show is starting to grow pretty rapidly. I got some data back from the pod charting company, and basically, we're cracking the top 200 in many countries in the science category, which is amazing because there's, 30,000 science podcasts in some of those countries. So as part of that growth, there's no monetization to this podcast. It's truly just a fascinating exploration of interdimensional fae. If you know somebody that you think should hear this, please share this show however it is that you're listening to it. That would be something amazing to keep the conversation going. It really does help, and it lets us reach out to people like Becca, who we're going to talk to tonight. So, Becca, thanks for your patience while I do that brief and first ever plug for my own podcast here on the show. So what I'd like to ask you to do, if you'd be so kind, please, Becca, with a lot of context, no rush here at all. As you know, because I've talked to you about it when we chatted earlier, we're not here to convince anyone of anything. We're just here to hear the fascinating details of people's encounters. So if you would be so kind, please walk us into this encounter with this green fae. If I understand correctly, it was in your bedroom with your partner. So if you could, please just let us know all about that.
Yeah, of course. I guess I'll start with where we were at in our lives at that time. We had been together for about 6 years, 2 kids together, 2 from separate relationships. Everything was going great. You know, we had our own business operating, doing really, really well. A little bit of financial struggle. He also had some addiction issues that we were working through. But overall, everything, you know, in life was getting better. This had happened on a fall evening. We were asleep. And so what had happened was, as far as I had known, so from my side of the story, I had awoken and noticed that there was, you know, my wall was green, and we slept with every light off, TV off. So it was kind of odd to me. So I had sat up in my bed, tried to find the source of the light. It got brighter and brighter up into the corner of my room. I noticed that my partner at the time was also awake and looking at this light. It felt like it was a lot longer than it was, the whole experience, I think. We had looked up at the corner. There was this bright ball of light. Probably the center of it was probably about the size of a tennis ball. And then there was striations almost coming out of it of green light, which were probably, you know, probably radiated about a foot. And it just looked like, you know, green light coming out of this center. And the green light just lit up the entire room. But there was no shadow. It was kind of odd. It was like a misty green just kind of blocked out everything in the room. You could still see a bit of the shapes of the things that were in there, like our TV and the books and the end of the bed. The window I could still see through, but everything else was just coated in this green color that was coming from the center. You know, we didn't say anything. We weren't scared. When we had talked about it after, we both mentioned, you know, we felt very calm. And after that, it seemed the center light, I say it clicked. It didn't really click though. It kind of felt like, you know, whatever was at the center of this ball of energy just kind of, you know, left after a couple minutes. And then the green light that kind of bathed the room, instead of it all just shutting off when this thing, quote unquote, left, it sort of went from the far corner and faded out to the corner where the light had come from. So it all just kind of slowly got darker while staying bright in that corner. And it just kind of faded out until it all reached that corner, and then it slowly left in that way. It was very odd. It's so hard to describe. Everything kind of felt fuzzy. That's the best way I have to explain that. But it felt like it had a mass, if that makes sense. And then just slowly faded out, as opposed to a light being switched off. And then so after that light had gone, instead of turning to each other, you know, what the heck was that? Like, in my brain, it was kind of repeating, like, oh, they're here. Oh, they're here. And then my conscious brain went like, who? Like aliens? Like, what do you mean? And then it's almost like that thought just kind of stopped. We both rolled over, fell back asleep without any issue. And when we had woken up the next day, that's when we turned to each other, like, you saw that, right? we both saw that. We saw the same thing. This is what happened. And we were able to confirm to each other that, yes, like that happened. Everything was green. It slowly faded out. It left, and we just went to sleep. I didn't really talk to him a lot about, knowing that it was a fairy, thinking that it was a fairy, or what exactly it was, just that it happened. I had been in, the supernatural community, I guess, since I was in my preteens, whereas he had never really delved into those kinds of things. But being in a relationship, he had started kind of looking into that stuff, but wasn't as into it as I was. But, just him acknowledging that that was what happened was kind of a real eye opener for me, and kept it on my mind. But I haven't really had anybody else to really go back and forth about this with, except for, my couple of medium friends who have, explained it as fairy energy. And like with asking for readings from other people, they'll always bring up the same thing, fairy energy and being around me and this and that. So I had always chalked it up to that. He never really cared to find an explanation, but he did definitely witness it. And so I've just kind of carried it with me, waiting for the time when I could meet anybody else that could, I guess, empathize with me.
Becca, thank you so much for taking the time to bring us into that encounter. And gosh, there's a lot of things that you've said that really come up for me. First of all, I do feel, quite honored that you would feel comfortable enough to share your story. And if it's okay with you, I'll tell the audience listening that Becca is my first official email submission. Which is a big deal, because at the end of the shows, I usually ask if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show to email me at encounters@fascinatingfae. And I was, really happy when I did get such a complete email from Becca. So Becca, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for having the courage to tell your story. You're right. It is hard to get into this kind of story with other people, even other people that are quote unquote open-minded or into the paranormal, because I find that when you start to say fairy, a whole lot is going on in the mind of the listener that you first have to pick through. Mm-hmm. And I want to just sort of add something to what you've said from my own experience, and to sort of build on what you're saying. It is so hard to describe what you've seen, and it is so hard to understand what you've seen. And it is not like Becca and I jumped up and we're like, aha, fairies, egad. We both were talking offline earlier and have gone through like a long process of not very satisfying self-directed research. When I say not satisfying, I mean not getting the answers as to what she saw and what I saw, which, there's all these qualities that you've just described that are so close to what I saw. And so if it's okay with you, now that I've sort of, I think, really framed what you've spoken about nicely by saying, like, look, we're saying fairy as a result of elimination of other possible things, arriving at fairy, not jumping to it as the first thing. And these things are super hard to talk about. So with that caveat, with all of that said, could I ask you some questions with some sort of breakdown details that I want to know about what you're talking about, if that would be okay with you?
Absolutely. Please do.
Okay. First question is, it's okay if you can't remember exactly. I'm just curious roughly what time of night you think this might have been that you were woken up.
It was around 2:30. I did look at the clock after it had all gone on.
That's cool. So yeah, my first guest, Ron, was awoken to see a fairy in his room around the same time. Mm-hmm. Seems that a lot of in-room encounters that are where a fairy or a fairy energy is attending a sleeping person is around that time. And I just think there's something interesting about that. So thank you for answering that detail. So when you woke up to see your wall being green, now this is going to be difficult and I know you did a good job of saying like a foggy green filling the room, but I'm going to ask you about the green itself. So when I saw my fairy, it was purple, but it's not like a purple that I could go pick a crayon out of a box and say that kind of purple. It was a weird purple. Could you do your best to add any description to the green itself, if you could, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the green was almost like if you were to be in a pitch black room and someone were to turn on a very bright neon green LED light. The way that there was almost rays coming out of the center. And if I think about it, right back to that moment, it's almost like those rays were, put together with all kinds of different colors, just like when you shine a white light through a prism and you get a rainbow. If I think about, close up to that center of the green light where all of the striations and the rays were coming out from, it's almost like, there was other colors kind of embedded in there that gave it a little bit of a starburst kind of effect. And then the glow was almost something different. Like it was a misty kind of, like it just touched everything. There was no shadow. That part didn't exactly have rays or anything to it. So it was a little bit misty looking when you looked around the room. But from the center, it was definitely like a ray from the center. That was just such a brilliant neon-y green color. That's probably the best that I can do about that.
I think you did a really good job there. And I like the word starburst a lot. With mine, and I know that I wasn't there. I'm sure you don't recall me being there. So, but with mine, the fringes were kind of like what you're describing. My fairy was purple, but it was fringing around itself, and I've talked about it looking like reality was deconstructing. And I feel instinctively like when you're talking about starburst and like the multifaceted color inclusion in these radiating fringed waves, it's so hard to describe. Let's just be honest.
Mm-hmm, yeah, you
For everyone listening, give us some grace. It's it's so hard to describe. You can say what you're seeing. That's not the problem. It's how do you adequately bring another person mentally to what you're talking about. It's so hard to describe. These things are impossibly in place. Do you know what I mean when I say that, Becca? Like they're there, but it's just not like other things being in the room.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Also, when you say like earlier that there was no shadow and like everything was green, the way that I have best been able to describe it, and not to talk about my own encounter too much during your show here, but it was like the purple took up all of the available space in the room in the cockpit of the boat when it came in.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's like everything is bathed. You said bathed, and I liked that as well. Actually, you've done a good service here because you've dropped quite a few unique words to this show that I think also do the job of talking about what these things look like, especially when they're glowing. And especially when they have a particular color.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say it was in the corner of the room, if you could maybe just help me understand the layout of your room and then where you are in the bed and which corner, so I can then ask my next questions.
Okay, well, this room was the smallest room in the house. Very, very small room. We had, so I guess if I go compass-wise, so the doors to the south, the bed was up against the southeast wall, and I had a dresser against the west wall, it would have been. And then where I saw the light would have been the southwest corner, so like directly across from the bed, I believe, if I have laid that out correctly. My brain doesn't love the compass, but the room is very small. It's, maybe 9 by 10 maximum.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for the dimensions, which was going to be a question I was about to ask. I can understand why this would have woken you up then. Was it very bright? Was a question that I don't think we really touched on. I know this is encompassing the space in the room, which might make you think it's bright, but I'm just curious, was it very bright, or was it, what was the kind of intensity level of the illumination?
It was bright. I wouldn't say it was bright enough to wake me up on its own. When I looked at the center of it, it was, a little bit more dim than if you were looking at, a regular light bulb in a lamp. A little bit more dim than that. So I'm honestly not sure what part of the whole encounter woke me up. But everything was definitely touched in light. It was illuminated, but it wasn't blinding. Very bright, but not blinding.
Thanks for that distinction. And I appreciate you taking the time to answer so many detailed questions about, how something is lit up or what color something is. For people that are enjoying and listening to this show, I hope for each and every one of you that you one day do get to see a fairy yourself and can be as mesmerized in trying to describe it as we are. So this thing's pretty close. When you noticed that your partner was also awake, was he also fixated on the object at that time?
Yes, from where I was, it looked like he had awoken and looked at it first. He was just staring at it when I woke up. And, I had to move to sit up. That movement didn't break his focus on what he was looking at there in the corner.
Very interesting detail. It may be that he woke up first that woke you. It also might be like, just in a lot of encounters, people have just this weird sense to do something that they can't quite describe. Your higher self is kicking in, or something to that effect is taking place. So you're looking at it approximately. Now, you said something earlier which really is interesting, actually, and this is the importance of being a good listener, is you said you felt like it lasted longer than it did. And in my encounter, I would say the same is true, but I would describe it a little differently. Like, I feel like time slowed down and then sped back up. For sure that happened in my encounter. But the real time, like if I were clicking a stopwatch and just trying to time it as we are talking right now, it was like 3 seconds. But it definitely was messing with time. So as you're saying that you felt like it lasted longer than it did, I just want to ask, anything that comes to mind about time as it related to when you were seeing this would be interesting for me to hear about, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the moment when it first happened, it didn't feel like anything had actually changed. It wasn't until it had disappeared and then completely faded out of the room that I felt heavier and like I was back to reality. I also wasn't awake when this had come into the room, clearly. So maybe, that had changed what speed I was processing everything at. But, in the moment, it felt like we were sitting there for probably 20 minutes. But then, after it had faded out and everything else, and I had kind of come back to reality, that's when I kind of realized that was a really quick encounter. But in the moment, it definitely felt like it was way longer.
I really appreciate you attempting to give that some voice. And when I say that would be really interesting for me to hear about, I really mean it would be interesting for me and the audience listening. They're the most important other person in this conversation outside of you. I'm just here to, ask these questions. I am the lucky one who gets to ask the questions. So thanks for sort of picking apart this encounter in as much detail as you have so far. I do really appreciate you taking the time, Becca. It's something I do really sincerely appreciate. Can I ask a few more questions? Because there's a couple of last details that you shared that are truly interesting, and I'd like to ask some questions about them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the way that you're talking about it leaving, and then the way that the light leaves almost after it left, is something I'd like you to try to get into again in a little bit more detail. Before I ask you to do that, when I was like seeing my fairy, the thing that was least satisfying for me in my research was there's not a lot in the research that talks about these components that you and I are discussing. And every research, thing that comes up when you put in the word fairy or fae doesn't seem to do it justice. It gets closer sometimes when you're talking about like orbs or interdimensionals in your research, but these things don't necessarily feel like what I saw either. That feels more like what I saw was a fairy. Anyway, when this thing came into my cockpit and the light was using up all of the purple, the purple was using up all of the available light in the space, and it left. I've described to you earlier the incredible intensity with which it happened, but I do recall, similarly to what you're talking about, that the light was a half second after it left.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talked to Ron, I was asking him about the light without much. Ron is my first guest if someone's just tuning in here to this episode. But I asked him, like, what's up with that? And he said something really interesting to me. He said that their aura precedes them into the room. Like their aura comes into the room before they do.
Okay.
That's how he put it.
That makes sense.
Okay, so yeah, I just thought I'd offer that up before I ask you to talk about what yours did when it left, because maybe it's like the reverse is true and their aura hangs out for a second after they leave. I don't know if that's right. I don't know that there's any true answers here at all. No one's an expert, but yeah, just tell us more about that if you could, please. Like the way that this light lingered and the leaving, that part almost deserves another just go at it by yourself if you could, please.
Yeah, I guess the best way to describe it would just be to connect what I saw with exactly what I felt. So yeah, like I was saying, when it was there, full strength, everything's lit up. I'm looking at it. I feel calm. My brain's repeating, they're here, they're here. I don't know what that means. It felt great. It felt like, an old friend was back from, a long trip or visiting after they had moved away. It was like, this is really cool. And then so there was the central light with the things radiating from it, and the rest of the light, which is what lingered, was the rest of the light. So when, like I had mentioned earlier, the way that the center had kind of clicked, I say that because I was staring right at it. It was bright as it was going to get, and then it almost dimmed by about half the brightness. And I kind of felt a little bit of sadness. And then the whole room started to dim, and it started to kind of suck up into that little corner. Slowly it all followed that little click off of the light from the far corner to the corner that it came from. And then it wasn't until it was all gone that I felt, almost empty or alone. It was, you could feel what you were seeing, and then it was just gone.
I felt I felt my fairy as much as anything. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And actually, one of my questions was going to be, did you have any emotional feelings? And you've already answered that for me, so I really appreciate you doing that. I'll have just not too many more questions about the actual encounter itself. I do want to ask a little bit about the next morning, just because I think that that's worth hearing about, the discussion that you and your partner had in a little bit more detail. And so, but before I do, as we move to wrap up, as we kind of get away from the encounter itself here, before we sort of stop, why do you think it was there? Now, there's no wrong answer or right answer. I'm just wondering if you have any type of intuition or instinct as to why you felt that it was there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been thinking on this one for a couple of years now. I think this happened in 2021, fall of 2021. And, ever since then, when it first happened, I thought, this was a relative. Maybe it was one of our grandparents that came to visit to let us know, everything's fine. Then I started to just kind of dismiss the whole encounter, thinking, because he woke up first, it was something for him. he can process this. I'm going to let it go because it's stressing me out way too much. And then it wasn't until I started, actually pretty recently, you know, maybe a few weeks ago, when I started looking into the meaning of the color paired with witnessing a fairy, which was when I found out that, you know, the color green, and if you're associating it with, you know, seeing a fairy, that means, you know, your life is on the up, you can expect abundance, all those kinds of things that you know, typically find when you look into colors and you know, the woo woo, as my friends would call it. Everything associated with green. So money, abundance, happiness, you know, all that fun stuff. Yeah.
Thanks for that insight. Yeah, you know, there is something to synesthesia. Like colors have a certain thing. Green and blue are good colors, undeniably. You know, and you can start to think about some colors that might make you feel like they're not good too, which is really interesting when you really do that with your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate you thinking about the green as in and of itself being symbolic. I will not lie when I say that I've thought about the purple a lot. And so similarly to you, in my research, purple is a heart color. It's like the color of royal purple blood. Like it's about pride, and it's, you know, it's basically a royal color in effect, and it is tied into strength and power and pride. And you know, I was in a boat that I used to champion nature. I wonder if that was what that color was symbolic of. You know, and if you're an artist and you're about to choose a color for a piece of work, you know what I'm talking about. Color matters.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I could just transition to the next morning, and I know this is a private conversation between you and your partner, so I don't need verbatim or anything. I'm just curious about like how quickly after waking up you both jumped to talking about this, and then anything that stands out in that conversation that he might have said his thoughts were, you know, because we haven't really heard his side. If you would be willing to share anything that, you know, he might have said to you the next day that we would find interesting, that would be great.
Absolutely. It was actually kind of odd. We both woke up at the same time, which was weird for us to begin with. He was, I always knew him as the one that was going to sleep in later than I did. But on the morning after, we woke up together. We just kind of sat up and looked at each other. And I think I was the one that said, "Did you see that last night? You were awake last night, right?" And he was like, yeah, I saw that. And I'm like, it was a green light. Everything was green. And he confirmed, yeah, that's what I saw. And I was like, what do you think it was? And he's like, honestly, I don't know. And I was like, well, maybe it was aliens. And then we just kind of laughed it off and got up for the day. And that was really it. That was, you know, we had mentioned it to each other a few times after that. And then that was pretty much it between us for talking about that.
Thanks for explaining those details. Each person is different, you know, and I think that some people see these things and have a way of just being able to move on. And I think also with 4 kids in the house and a day to start, I can understand why you would have just gotten on with your day. But yeah, it is remarkable when somebody sees one of these things with another person.
Mm-hmm.
And Becca, when I saw my fairy, it was with a partner at the time too. And I would say for sure, I've said this on the show before and I'll say it again here, I would not have started this show if I hadn't been with another person.
Mm-hmm.
Because she could confirm for me and I could confirm for her identically, just like you're describing your partner being able to confirm for you. I have not been able to forget this or let it go or dismiss it otherwise.
Exactly. There's so many other experiences that I've had that have been on my own that I've never said anything about just because there isn't that external validation. But with him being able to say, yep, that's exactly what I saw. We were both awake. It was like, okay, this happened.
Here's something that I will just offer up as a thought for the sake of everyone listening, and that includes you. I listen to Sasquatch podcasts. I love the topic of Sasquatch. A lot of encounters are solo, but sometimes they are shared with another person. And that's kind of like, those are the juicy ones. You know what I mean? Like when there's two guests and each of them is talking about it, that's when you're like, oh, wow, shared encounter. Because what that means for the listener or the person who's trying to critically investigate this subject matter is this is not a delusion. That's the immediate thing when there's another person, is now you know it's not a delusion because there's another visual eyewitness with the same, you know. And like one of the most famous Sasquatch stories is from the Midwest and involves 4 witnesses during the day, adult witnesses who all saw the same thing. How are you going to say that that was a delusion? Similarly, you know, you had a partner with you, I had a partner with you. My point, just to kind of tie this all together, is that fairies are the least easy to talk about paranormal phenomena, hands down. Straight up the easiest to laugh at. I catch so much crap literally from people that I love and trust when I tell them, hey, my podcast is taking off and this is my subject matter. But many people that are coming forward to this show, and I mean like the balance of it is greater right now of double witness sightings than it is to single witness sightings for people that I've talked to. So Sasquatch might only let you have a peek at him or her when you're by yourself, but fairies do not have a problem, it seems, showing themselves to groups, showing themselves to couples. And I find that really interesting and really validating, because it might be the most difficult to talk about paranormal phenomena, might be the easiest to dismiss. But from my perspective, hosting this podcast, I'm talking to a lot of people that have seen them with another person. And so, you know, what can you say about that, really? I'm not saying there's any fact there or that means anything, but it is observationally interesting, and it's something that I wanted to say out loud. So, Becca, I think we've covered pretty much all of the questions that I feel lucky enough to be able to ask you here tonight. The only question that I do have left, and I ask this to everybody that comes on the show, there's no wrong answer here, and there is no right answer here, because truly no one knows for sure about this. And especially the type of fairy stuff that we're talking about is really not referenceable very easily with a Google search. So with all of that caveat, my question to you is simply this. What do you think that fairies are?
Well, you know, I've asked myself that question for a number of years. But it wasn't really until I had started listening to the talks that had come out of Dolores Cannon. And her work was mostly about, you know, extraterrestrials and other dimensional beings. And so I really found, after listening to her work, you know, she did a lot of work in, oh no, my brain right now. She did a lot of work in, oh my gosh, I'm having a total moment. I should know this because I was going to sign up for it. Oh, that's it. She did a lot of work in hypnotherapy, and she had started with, you know, the basics of, you know, smoking and addictions and eating problems and stuff like that, moved her way into past lives. And then as that progressed, she worked her way into actually connecting with, through her clients, with extraterrestrial beings who were essentially, you know, beings of other dimensions. And the talks are amazing. If you can find them, they're amazing to hear. And they actually align a lot with, you know, what we're talking about now with fairies. And so I've really come to equate fairies with other dimensional beings. and they can come and they can go. They're energetic just like we are, just on a different plane. And you know, some of us are lucky enough to experience them. And that's basically where I'm at for now.
I think that's a great answer, and is very close to where I land too. To be completely honest, I do think that what I saw was an interdimensional entity. And I would go further and I would say that what I saw was an individual, like you and I are individuals, Becca. You know, you're you, I'm me. Mm-hmm. What I saw was itself. And you talked about an emotional sense of like a friend is here and a sadness when it was moving away. That's a response to an individual. It's a response to a person or an entity, a soul, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. Quantum physics certainly allows for the multiple dimension hypothesis, you know, to have a good baseline. And when we talk about energy and, you know, something that I don't mean to correct you, and I never wish to ever really interject in any negative way to a guest, but I was just thinking about energy myself the other day. And it turns out that I listened to this podcast called Skeptoid by Brian Dunning, which is a great show for anyone listening. It's about skeptical analysis. And Brian Dunning would laugh this podcast out of the room. He would say immediately that he would have 10 reasons why none of these eyewitness accounts are true. Mm. In his particular episode, he's talking about energy, and he's getting like really down to the dictionary definition of energy, you know, and he's like, mm-hmm. Energy is like calories. Like if you have a muffin and you eat it, the muffin has enough energy in it to let you then walk up the stairs carrying a bag. You know, that's what energy is. So when people talk about energy, they, in the metaphysical or paranormal sense, they don't have it right. But, you know, so that's what people listening who are listening from the perspective of Brian Dunning are going to think when they hear us talking, right? Mm-hmm. But to help, and again, I'm not trying to correct you, but to help, I think, really build on what you're saying, because you've said what you think, you know, in a beautiful way, and I agree with you. So to help build on that, it's a vibrational thing is a better way mm-hmm. to maybe understand it. And if you look at a quantum physics perspective, molecules of matter are really just intermingling vibrations at their base level.
Exactly.
Exactly, right? And so the frequency at which something vibrates at is not energy, but it's a frequency. But it is a type of energetic frequency, right? You can't deny that a guitar string is buzzing with energy at a frequency. You can't have frequency without a source of energy powering it, right? So mm-hmm. we're talking about something that has a mechanics that is sound in both traditional physics and quantum physics for existing. And like I always say to people, where does our soul exist? Would you please, Becca, take your soul and put it in a jar for me and show it to me?
Exactly.
But we know that our own thinking, even just like, you know, in a, like, think about just like mantras or vibrational stuff with your own voice, just going om, creating a vibration within mm-hmm. yourself is a way of changing many aspects of how you're doing, how you're feeling, on and on and on. And so when we're talking about energy, when we're talking about interdimensional, you know, energy transfers, vibrational shifts that allow for perception to occur, all of it, you can experience yourself within yourself through meditation, through use of voice. And, you know, I think people that are open and lucky, like you said, might get to see a fairy naturally. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just to sort of finish off, and I don't mean to like mansplain fairies to anybody. I really, truly don't know what this stuff is at all, but these explanations feel the closest to the truth to me. So I thank you for letting me build on what you said. And I also really sincerely appreciate you taking the time to, you know, just talk to me here late tonight after all the kids are in bed about what you saw. It's truly wonderful for me to be able to receive these stories, and I hope that you do really understand that I mean it when I say it's brave of you to do that, and I really do appreciate you having the courage to step up and say, yeah, this is what I saw. And I wish for everybody listening, if you've had an encounter as well, I hope that you feel comfortable coming forward. It's Fascinating Fae at all the socials, and you can just drop me a line there. So Becca, I know it's pretty late in Ontario. It's getting later in the evening here on the coast. Two Canadians just enjoying a discussion about fairies late into the evening on a Friday night. What I usually like to do is just let the guests say goodbye or say any last thoughts, really about anything at all as we go to sign off here. And so the mic is all yours tonight.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. Honestly, it's been great to be able to convey my experience to someone who actually understands and can empathize a little bit on my level. I definitely encourage anybody who's experienced anything remotely like this, totally feel free to reach out. This was a really cool activity for a Friday night.
Well, with that said, on behalf of all of our human and non-human listeners tuning into Fascinating Fae tonight, super big thanks to Becca from Ontario telling us about her shared encounter with a bright green fairy in her bedroom not that long ago, just in 2021. Becca, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Can actually be, or else they would try to intervene. Can actually be, or else they would try to intervene.